The bag twitched. At first, I thought it was the wind, that strange, hollow rustle plastic makes when it's caught in the gutter. But then it jerked again, more violently, like something inside was fighting for air. The alley smelled of rot and rain, that thick, metallic scent of a storm still lingering in the cracks between bricks. My shoes splashed in shallow puddles as I stepped closer. Whoever had left this bag here had knotted it tight. The black plastic stretched thin where it bulged, pulsing faintly. My throat went dry. A low, muffled sound bled through the plastic. Not quite a cry, not quite a whimper, but something in between. The kind of sound living things make when they've given up shouting. My fingers hesitated over the knot, trembling. I could hear my own heartbeat now, loud in my ears, drowning out the distant hum of the city. Somewhere, someone had decided that whatever was in here didn't deserve to breathe, and I was standing between that decision and its final outcome. The alley was a place you only found if you weren't supposed to be there. A sliver of space carved between two buildings that leaned toward each other like they were conspiring to hide whatever passed between them. It was dusk, the kind that doesn't really announce itself, just drains the color from the air until the streetlights stutter to life. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the smell of it still clung to the air. Damp concrete, rusted metal, the faint copper bite of something old and wet and forgotten. My shoes slapped against the uneven pavement, each step sending up tiny bursts of cold mist from puddles still trembling from the last downpour. I wasn't supposed to be here. I had taken a shortcut because the main road was backed up with cars, and I told myself I didn't mind walking. But the moment I stepped into that alley, it felt like stepping into a photograph I hadn't meant to look at. One of those grainy, black, and white ones where you can't quite tell what's in the shadows. That's when I heard it. A sound so faint I almost convinced myself it was nothing, a rustle like plastic brushing against brick. I slowed, head turning toward a pile of garbage bags sagging near the back fence. They were the kind of bags you didn't want to think too much about. Overstuffed, bulging at odd angles, some torn open to reveal wet cardboard and the slick, glistening remains of food no one wanted. I might have walked past if it hadn't happened again. That twitch. Just a small jerk of movement, almost imperceptible, but enough to make the hairs along my arms rise. It could have been a rat, I told myself. A raccoon. But the second twitch was stronger, and this time I heard it, a sound muffled so deeply it was hard to tell if it was real. Not a squeak, not exactly a cry. Something softer, weaker. Like a voice that had been calling for a long time and was now only capable of whispering. My stomach knotted. There's a certain kind of wrong you feel before you understand it. A pressure in your chest, an ache in your teeth. I stepped closer, my shoes sinking slightly into the soft, trash, slick ground. The bag in question was black, the cheap kind that tears if you look at it too hard, but someone had tied this one so tightly the plastic stretched in pale, strained lines where the knot bit into itself. The bulge in the middle moved again, slower this time, like whatever was inside was running out of strength. My fingers hovered over the knot. The rain's whisper filled the space between my heartbeat and my thoughts. I imagined, for one reckless second, just walking away, pretending I hadn't seen it. My life would stay cleaner that way. But then that sound came again, weaker still, and I realized it wasn't the kind of sound you could unhear. I tugged at the knot. The plastic was slick under my fingers, refusing to give. My nails scraped at it, slipping off. I yanked harder, my hands clumsy with urgency, and the bag gave a low, strained groan like it might tear. The twitching had slowed to barely their tremors, and panic began to push out the cold logic I'd walked in with. My breath came sharper, the world narrowing to the stubborn twist of plastic, and the knowledge that something alive was fading inside it. One final pull, and the knot snapped loose. The smell hit me first, a mix of rot and filth, and something unmistakably alive, that warm animal scent threaded with fear. I peeled the plastic back. She was small. So much smaller than I expected. A dog, if you could still call her that, her fur matted into clumps of mud and trash, her ribs like the fragile frame of a bird beneath skin that was both too loose and too tight in places. Her eyes, God, her eyes, barely open, clouded with exhaustion, yet locking onto mine like she was trying to measure how much time she had left. She didn't make a sound. Not a bark, Not a growl, not even a whimper now. Just looked. I think that's what broke me. The quiet of it. The way she didn't fight, didn't plead. As if life had already left her once and she wasn't sure whether to bother coming back. Without thinking, I slid my coat off and wrapped her in it. She was lighter than the coat itself, frighteningly so. When I lifted her, her head lolled against my chest, and for a second I thought I was too late. But then I felt it. The faintest flutter of breath against my wrist. I pulled her closer, the rain soaking through both of us, and started running. The nearest vet was several blocks away, but in that moment the distance felt like an ocean. The city blurred around me. Neon signs smearing into the wet night, the slap of my shoes against asphalt, my own rag breathing mingling with the low rumble of thunder somewhere far away. Every step was a silent promise I wasn't sure I could keep. Stay with me. Just stay. By the time I reached the vet, my arms were numb from holding her, but I didn't dare adjust my grip. I shoved the door open with my shoulder, stumbling inside. Warm light hit me like a wave, along with the smell of antiseptic and wet fur. Heads turned. A receptionist started to speak, but one look at the bundle in my arms and her voice shifted into urgency. "We need a doctor now." Hands were on us then, gently but quickly pulling her from me, the coat peeling away to reveal the frail body beneath. Someone asked me what happened. I opened my mouth to answer, but the words stuck in my throat, replaced by the sharp, burning sting behind my eyes. I just shook my head and watched as they carried her through a swinging door, the sound of it flapping shut sealing me into a waiting room that felt far too quiet. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second stretching until it felt cruel. I paced, sat, stood again. My hands shook, and not from the cold. The smell of rain still clung to me, mixing with the sterile air. I kept seeing her eyes, that question in them, like she was weighing whether I was worth believing in. A memory slid into my mind uninvited, my childhood dog, Daisy, a golden retriever who had died while I was away at school. My parents had told me over the phone. I never got to say goodbye. That regret had lived in me for years, buried under the daily grind. Now, it pressed against my ribs like it was trying to claw its way out. Maybe that's why I couldn't sit still. Maybe that's why I needed her to make it. Not just for her, but for the part of me that still wanted to make amends with something I'd lost long ago. Time warped in that room. I don't know how long it was before the vet came out, pulling off her gloves with a slow, deliberate motion that made my stomach drop. Her face was a careful mask, the kind professionals wear when they're about to hand you a truth you don't want. She told me they'd stabilized her for now, but it was touch and go. Severe dehydration, malnourishment, signs of prolonged neglect. There were wounds that had started to heal badly, infections they were working to control. "She's a fighter," the vet said softly, almost as if she didn't want to jinx it. "But it's going to be a long road." I nodded, though my chest ached with the effort. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I realized I was already in it for the long road. That whatever happened next, walking away wasn't an option anymore. The first night was the hardest. They let me see her after the IVs were in and her breathing had steadied enough that the rise and fall of her chest didn't feel like it might stop at any moment. She was lying on a small steel table, her head turned toward the wall as though even the fluorescent light above her was too much. Tubes snaked from her foreleg into a bag of clear fluid that dripped steadily, each drop a slow, measured beat in the room's tense silence. Someone had washed her gently. I could smell the faint trace of unscented soap under the sterile tang of the clinic. But the dirt was so deeply tangled into her fur that it clung stubbornly, making her look patchy, uneven. When I stepped closer, she didn't lift her head. Her eyes cracked open just enough to see me, but there was no recognition there, no spark. I realized then how far gone she must have been when I found her. How close she had come to that quiet place where you stop caring who's there. I put my hand on the edge of the table, leaving it there without moving, without pushing closer. "You're safe now," I whispered, though I wasn't sure she believed me. I wasn't sure I even believed it yet. That night I went home, but the walls of my apartment felt wrong. The couch where I sat seemed to reject me, my own bed too still, too empty. Every sound outside, a car passing, a neighbor's door slamming, seemed distant, unimportant. I kept seeing that alley, that trash bag, that moment her eyes found mine. Sleep didn't come easily. When it finally did, it carried dreams of rain and plastic suffocating in my hands, of knots I couldn't undo no matter how hard I pulled. By morning, I was back at the clinic before they unlocked the doors. The receptionist gave me a look that was half surprised, half knowing, and let me in. She was still on the table, but sitting up now, her head lifted in weak defiance. When she saw me, her gaze held just a second longer than before. It wasn't trust, not yet, but maybe the faint recognition that I was the same stranger who had pulled her from the dark. The vet told me her progress was slow but steady. She'd managed a few laps of water. They were introducing soft food, though she barely touched it. Her body was still in survival mode, holding on to every ounce of energy like it might vanish. Over the next week, I came every day. At first, I only sat nearby, speaking softly, letting her grow used to the shape of my voice. She'd watch me from the corner of her eye, head still turned toward the wall, her ears twitching at the sound but her body frozen, as if motion might invite pain. But on the fourth day, something shifted. She shifted. I had brought cooked chicken that I'd shredded into small pieces. I held one between my fingers, my hand resting on the floor so it didn't loom above her. For a long time, nothing happened. I could hear the ticking of the clock in the corner, the faint hum of the air conditioner, my own breathing. Then her nose twitched. Slowly, painfully, she inched forward, each movement measured like she was calculating the risk. She took the chicken with a gentleness that broke me. No snap, no rush, just the soft brush of her teeth against my skin, and then she retreated again, curling back into herself. By the second week, the vet was talking about recovery rather than survival. She was gaining weight, her fur slowly losing its oily clumps, her eyes clearing enough to reveal a shade of deep amber. But she remained wary. Touch was still a language she didn't understand. When a hand moved too fast, she flinched so hard it made my chest hurt. And sometimes, when the clinic was too noisy or the shadows fell in a certain way, she'd freeze, her eyes going distant. I didn't need to ask to know she was somewhere else entirely, back in whatever dark corner of her past had taught her that humans were something to fear. I learned her patterns. How she'd lean ever so slightly toward my voice, but away from my hands. How she let me place food beside her without backing up now. How, once, she closed her eyes when I hummed a song under my breath like it was something she remembered from a time when the world was kind. The day she wagged her tail for the first time was so small I almost missed it. It was barely more than a flick, a hesitant test of whether joy was still allowed. But once I saw it, it lit something in me. I knew then that we were crossing into new territory. The vet said she could be released in another week. They'd need to find her a foster or an adopter who could handle the emotional work she'd still require. She looked at me like she already knew what I was going to say before I even said it. "Take her," I told her. My voice didn't shake, even though my chest felt heavy with the weight of the decision. Or maybe it wasn't a decision at all. Maybe it had been decided in that alley the moment I chose not to walk away. The first night in my apartment was quiet. Too quiet. She didn't explore much, just found a corner where she could keep the whole room in view and stayed there, her body curled but her eyes open. I didn't force her out. I let her watch me as I moved around, narrating my actions softly like I had in the clinic, washing dishes, making tea, reading on the couch, letting her see that nothing bad would come from my hands, my voice, my presence. It took weeks for her to leave that corner on her own. But one night, as I sat on the couch half asleep, I felt the faintest weight settle beside me. I turned my head slowly. She was there, not touching me but close enough that her warmth brushed my side. Her head lowered onto the cushion, her eyes closing in trust, so tentative it felt like holding a rare, fragile bird in my hands. I didn't move for hours. Months passed like that, her world expanding inch by inch, trust built on small moments strung together like beads on a string. She learned that my hands meant food, comfort, a scratch behind the ears that made her sigh. She learned the sound of my laugh, the rhythm of my footsteps, the creak of the bed when I shifted in the night. And I learned her, too, the way she tilted her head when she was curious, the low huff she made when she was content, the way her eyes softened when she looked at me now, no longer measuring whether I was safe but knowing it. The day I took her back to the alley, it was spring. The rain had been replaced by sunlight that pooled between the bricks, painting the ground gold. She walked beside me, her leash loose in my hand, her gait steady. When we reached the spot, she stopped, sniffed the air, then looked up at me. Her eyes, still amber, still deep, held something I couldn't name. Maybe recognition, maybe closure. Then she turned her face toward the sun, closed her eyes, and breathed. A long, slow breath that seemed to fill her entire body. I stood beside her, the warmth on my face, the quiet between us saying everything. This was the place I'd found her. This was the place she'd left behind. And now she was here on her own terms. Alive. Her first real walk happened on a morning where the sky looked like it had been rinsed clean. Overnight rain had left everything glistening, each leaf trembling under the weight of tiny droplets, each street lamp catching the light in glassy halos. I'd been patient, waiting for her to signal she was ready, but that morning she surprised me. She was standing by the door when I came into the room, her body still but her eyes steady, focused on the leash hanging from the hook. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't even an obvious request. But something in her stillness told me she was ready to trade her small, safe world for something wider. I knelt down, moving slowly, speaking low as I clipped the leash onto her collar. She flinched, just once, then exhaled. Outside, the air smelled of wet pavement and earth, of the faint sweetness of something blooming nearby. Her steps were hesitant at first, paws pressing lightly against the sidewalk as if testing whether it would hold her. Every sound made her ears flick. A car door closing in the distance, the rustle of a pigeon's wings overhead. I let her lead, never pulling, letting the leash stay loose enough that she could feel in control. Half a block from home, she stopped, her body lowered slightly, her tail dipping. Ahead, two men were carrying trash bags to a dumpster, the plastic crinkling and snapping in the morning air. Her eyes fixed on the bags, her chest rising faster. I could feel the tension pulling for the leash, the memory of a black knot and suffocating plastic surging through her, like a shadow that had been waiting. I stepped closer, speaking softly, my voice trying to cut through the sound. "It's all right. You're here. You're safe." My hand brushed her side gently, letting her feel that I was there, solid, unhurried. She looked up at me, her amber eyes searching, and something shifted. She turned her head away from the bags and took a step forward. Then another. By the time we passed the dumpster, her tail had lifted just enough to sway. Walks became part of our rhythm after that. Not every one was easy. A sudden noise could still make her freeze. A shadow in the wrong place could still pull her back into herself. But she always came back, always found my eyes, always moved forward again. I started to think about taking it back to where it began. Not to relive it, but to reclaim it. The day I chose was warm, the kind of spring day that makes the air feel almost drinkable. We walked slowly, her pace steady, her head lifting every so often to catch a breeze. As we turned onto the narrow street that led to the alley, I felt my own chest tighten. The buildings leaned the same way they had that night, shadows pooling in the same uneven cracks between bricks. But in daylight, it looked smaller, less like a place the world had forgotten, and more like just another cut in the city's skin. We reached the mouth of the alley, and she stopped. Not out of fear, not exactly. Her nose lifted, tasting the air. I could see the muscles along her back ripple, her ears turning forward. We stood there a long moment, the sun pressing warm hands on our shoulders. I didn't move, didn't urge her. If she wanted to turn away, we would. But she stepped forward. Her paws moved soundlessly over the same ground where I had first knelt with my trembling hands. The faint smell of damp brick rose up in the heat, mingling with the metallic memory of rain in my mind. She paused once, glancing at a dark corner where trash still gathered, but she didn't linger. When we reached the far end, the sunlight spilled across her face, gilding her fur in gold. She looked up at me then, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Not just trust, not just gratitude. It was ownership. This was her life now. She had walked through the place where someone had decided she didn't deserve one, and she had kept walking until the sun found her again. I crouched down beside her, one hand resting lightly against her shoulder. Her breathing was slow, even. The leash hung loose, forgotten. She turned her face into the wind, eyes closing, letting it calm through her fur. For a moment, she stood completely still, the kind of stillness that doesn't come from fear, but from being entirely present. And I thought about that first night. The knot in my hands, the weight of her in my arms, the sound of rain swallowing the city. I realized then that the alley hadn't been the place I found her. It had been the place we began. We stayed like that until the light shifted and the shadows began to stretch. When we finally walked away, her tail was high, swaying in an easy rhythm, each step carrying us further from the darkness and deeper into the kind of life neither of us had expected to find. By the third night, something had changed in her eyes. The hard, cold emptiness was replaced by a flicker of something fragile, not quite trust, but maybe the curiosity to believe that trust could exist. She had stopped turning her head away when food came. She no longer pressed herself into the farthest shadow. And when Maria crouched down, a soft hum in her throat, the dog stayed. Not close, not ready, but she stayed. It was the first time Maria dared to speak to her. "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you again," she whispered. The next morning, they decided it was time, not to force her out, but to at least make it so she couldn't hurt herself trying to escape. The rescue team carefully slid the cage door open and, moving slowly, began to lay a soft blanket inside. That's when she did something no one expected. She didn't bolt. She just watched, her head low, as if weighing whether the world could possibly be kind. Hours later, Maria sat just outside the cage with her back turned. She didn't look at the dog. She didn't reach for her. She just sat there, breaking off tiny pieces of chicken and placing them behind her, letting the dog come to her in her own time. It took nearly 40 minutes, but eventually a paw stretched forward, then another, until finally the dog was close enough for Maria to feel her trembling against her leg. The first touch was barely a brush, just the edge of her fur against Maria's sleeve. But to Maria, it was everything. She named her Luma, light, because even in the darkest place, this dog had carried a tiny flame that refused to go out. By the time the volunteers got Max to the shelter, night had already swallowed the town. Streetlights flickered over empty sidewalks, and the sound of the van's engine echoed in the quiet parking lot. Inside, Max didn't move much. His head rested on the blanket they'd wrapped around him, his eyes half closed, drifting between exhaustion and a wary sort of awareness. Every once in a while, he'd flick his gaze toward the volunteers, as if still trying to understand if this new chapter was going to hurt as much as the last. The shelter staff worked quickly. They didn't ask him for trust. Dogs like Max had already been asked for too much. Instead, they moved softly, speaking in low tones, giving him space while gently checking for injuries. The rope had left raw marks around his neck, some of the skin broken, but nothing too deep. His ribs were visible under his coat, a silent testimony to weeks, maybe months without proper food. The vet on duty, Dr. Allen, was older, with the kind of face that looked like it had seen too many stories like Max's. He ran his hands over Max's frame, murmuring words Max couldn't understand but somehow found comforting. "You've been through hell, buddy," Dr. Allen said softly, almost to himself. "But it's over now. You're safe." The first real test came when they offered him food. Max's nose twitched before his body even moved, the scent of something warm and meaty pulling at instincts older than fear. But when the bowl was placed in front of him, he didn't dive in. He glanced up at the humans as if asking, "Is this for me?" When no one stopped him, he began to eat, slowly at first, then with a desperation that broke everyone's heart in the room. Afterward, they led him to a small kennel lined with fresh blankets. Max stepped inside but didn't lie down. He just stood there, staring at the open door, as if bracing for it to slam shut. When it didn't, when no one rushed in to tie him up or shove him into a corner, he finally lowered himself onto the blankets. His breathing slowed. His eyes stayed open a while longer before exhaustion won. What no one knew then was that Max's story wasn't just about survival. It was about the way a single act of kindness can ripple outward, changing lives far beyond the one you saved. Over the weeks that followed, Max would begin to trust, not all at once, but in small, fragile moments. And in doing so, he'd end up mending pieces of the people who helped him, in ways they didn't even realize they needed. Because sometimes, the ones we rescue are the ones who rescue us back. A few days later, the construction company finally sent someone to patch the broken section of the fence. Workers came in with tools and bright orange safety vests, the clanging of metal and the hum of machinery filling the air. Daisy watched them from the porch, her ears perked and head tilted, curious about all the activity. It was strange for her to see strangers so close to her territory, and she barked once, not out of aggression, but as if to say, "This is my place. You'd better be nice to it." After a while, one of the workers, a tall man with a friendly face, set down his drill and walked toward her slowly. "Hey there, girl," he said softly, his voice gentle despite the rumble of work going on behind him. Daisy wagged her tail cautiously. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small treat, probably something kept for his own dog at home, and offered it to her. She sniffed it, then carefully took it from his hand, munching with visible approval. This little moment was brief, but it sparked something in Mrs. Lee. She realized how easily Daisy connected with kind people, even strangers. It made her think about how much potential her dog had to bring joy to others, not just her. Mrs. Lee had been reading about therapy dogs lately, animals trained to visit hospitals, nursing homes, and schools to comfort people who were lonely or stressed. She started wondering, could Daisy become one of those dogs? The idea stayed with her all day. That night, she sat on the couch with her laptop and began researching the requirements for therapy dog certification. Daisy was already well-mannered, friendly, and intelligent, traits that many dogs needed months of training to achieve. She would still need to pass certain tests and get used to different environments, but Mrs. Lee felt it was possible. Over the next week, Mrs. Lee started introducing Daisy to new places. They went to the local park, the outdoor farmers market, and even the pet-friendly bookstore downtown. Daisy took it all in stride, walking calmly beside her owner, greeting strangers with gentle curiosity. The more people they met, the more Mrs. Lee noticed how Daisy seemed to make others smile instantly. One little boy even hugged her without asking, and instead of pulling away, Daisy leaned into him, her eyes closing in contentment. Something was changing in Daisy. She was no longer just a dog who stayed behind the fence, watching the world from afar. She was starting to explore it, to interact with it, and, most importantly, to touch the hearts of those she met. Mrs. Lee knew they were on the right path. And deep down, she sensed that whatever future Daisy had, it was going to be much bigger than either of them had imagined. And maybe that's the thing about love. It doesn't always come from where you expect, but when it does, it changes you forever. The little puppy who had once been tossed away like trash now had a warm bed, a full belly, and a family who looked at him like he was the most precious thing in the world. The biker still rode the same long roads, but never alone. Beside him now was a loyal shadow with a wagging tail, a reminder that sometimes you don't rescue them. They rescue you right back. The officers eventually placed the man in the back of their squad car, but his eyes kept darting toward the dog, as if trying to send a final wordless message. The rescuers didn't linger. They knew this moment was about getting the dog to safety, not untangling the human drama unfolding behind them. The crate was loaded gently into the rescue van, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the dog was moving away from the place that had trapped her in fear and hunger. On the ride back, she stayed curled in the corner of the crate, trembling less now, almost as if she was beginning to believe she wasn't going back to that darkness. One of the volunteers kept a steady, quiet stream of encouragement, not touching her yet, just letting the sound of a kind voice fill the space where silence and dread used to live. The city lights reflected in her eyes as she peeked out of the crate, and for a flicker of a second, her tail gave the smallest, almost invisible wag. When they arrived at the shelter, the crate door opened to a room warmed by soft blankets, the smell of food, and the hum of gentle heaters. She hesitated at the edge, eyes wide, body low to the ground, before taking one cautious step forward, and then another. No one rushed her. No one pulled her. They simply let her decide in her own time to leave the crate behind. That night she ate until her belly was full, drank deeply, and curled into a blanket so thick it seemed to swallow her whole. Outside, the rain still fell, but here, in this small circle of light and warmth, the storm couldn't reach her anymore. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in days, maybe weeks, she slept. Somewhere in the quiet, a life that had been paused in fear was starting again. And though she didn't know it yet, the next time she stepped into the world, it would be toward hands that wanted but to love her, and a future where no cage, no darkness, would ever hold her again.